Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, this is Mr. S. Welcome back to my channel. Why don't we just do something fun today, shall we? Haven't been doing a lot of these more edited tutorials lately, so why don't you just sit back, grab your watercolor supplies, and I'll show you how you can make some truly cool bookmarks. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, so let's go ahead and begin. So as you can see before you, I have everything all laid out and ready to go. So I'll go through the setup of what I did here real quick for you. I have a board here. This is not the table. You can attach the watercolor paper to the table if you want to, but I like to be more portable, so as you can see, I can move this around no problem. I've attached my watercolor paper. In this case, I'm using a Grumbacher cold press paper. It doesn't really matter what paper you have, as long as it's just for watercolor, you'll be just fine. Mixed media paper works fine. Cold press watercolor paper works the best for what we're going to be doing here. I've secured the paper all the way around on its edges because with watercolor, you always have to remember that the paper is going to want to buckle up and bulge outwards because you're adding a bunch of water to it. So securing all around the border of your paper will make things a lot easier for you. In this case, I just use nice simple washi tape because it doesn't tear up the paper when you try to take it off. Masking tape would also work as long as you run the tape across your skirt or your pants a couple of times to get rid of some of the adhesive. You can see I've also placed a strip of washi tape right down the middle because we're going to be making two bookmarks as you saw at the beginning of the video. Beside each of the sides of my paper, I've put the colors I'm going to be using. You can't really tell from these, but I'm going to be using a purple and a blue for the left-hand side of the paper. And over on the right, I'm going to be using primarily a green with a little bit of the blue. The reason you can't tell these colors apart is because since these are cakes of watercolor instead of tubes, they're very, very densely packed pigment inside here. So as soon as I put water inside here, you'll see the colors start to emerge. But basically, purple and blue over here, mostly green, a little bit of blue over here. As to what shades of purple and blue and green you have, it doesn't really matter if you match mine exactly. All that matters is that you have a purple, a blue, and a green, because you can make almost infinite amounts of various tones from these simply through the use of water. The brushes I'll be using are a small, a medium, and a large. These two are mop brushes, meaning they have very, very soft tips and can pack in a whole lot of water very easily. This one's a Da Vinci, and this one is a Paul Rubens mop brush. You don't need these specifically, these are pretty expensive. As long as you just have a small, a medium, and a large brush, again, you'll probably do just fine. The small one is for more technical applications. This is a silver black velvet, in case you're curious. Again, you don't have to have these to make good art. Just find 3 brushes, and you'll probably be just fine. So just remember, art supplies don't make a good artist. A good artist makes the most from their art supplies. Having the more expensive stuff just makes certain things a little bit easier. For other supplies, of course, I have a tub of water over here on the side. Naturally, if we're working with water, we're probably going to accidentally cause some spills to happen. And if that's the case, then I have my paper towel ready to go. I can also use this for certain effects that may or may not be showing up in these bookmarks. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started, shall we? I'm gonna first take my largest brush that I have, get it mixed up in the water, just like so. And there we are. Get lots of water loaded into my brush. And then I'm going to just gently brush a layer of water onto my watercolor paper on the left-hand side, ignoring the right for now. I want to get a nice even layer of water across here. I don't want massive puddles anywhere, and I don't want too many dry spots, if possible. Just look at it in the light and see if everything looks good to you. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to dip my brush into my water again. I'm going to grab my purple palette, and I'm just going to start loading some water into this little tub. And as I do so, the watercolor gets activated and a layer of water will start to form on the top there, as you can see. So I'm going to start applying some water onto this paper, but I'm not going to just brush it on. I'm going to do what's called the blotting method. And what the blotting method is, you load up your brush with color, and then instead of gently swiping it onto the paper, you just sort of tap it on, just like that. The key with blotting is that there's a lot of water and a little bit of paint, and you just kind of let the water move around the paper. Since the paper is already soaked, the watercolor is naturally going to start spreading out. As you can see, it's doing so as I move around. For this effect to work really well, I want to try to leave white space inside here. I can have spots of color here and there, but I also want to make sure that I don't just cover the entire paper with my color. Otherwise, there is no real point to wetting the paper in the first place. There's no real quote-unquote correct or incorrect way to do this. That's why I like this method so much, because all of you can follow the exact same instructions that I'm going to give you with this, and you'll all come up with something different. Because either because of how you wet the paper, or what kind of brush you're using. There's just so many different factors that's all going to come together to make something unique and different for every single one of you. The key is to not overwork it. The hardest part with watercolor is knowing when you need to stop. So I'm just going to come through here and soften up these edges a little bit because they look a bit too harsh to me. Alright, now that that's going, I'm going to put my brush back into my purple palette and soak up even more paint. Get a lot more on there so the color's a lot darker. Because the paper's very wet now. So I'm going to start applying my very dark purple in small spaces around the painting. I want there to be a variety of tone across here, so as much as possible, I avoid trying to just go over every single part of the painting like I did before. Gotta leave some spots. Some dark, some medium, some light. Look at all that variety I've gotten just from this one color. That's the fascinating thing about watercolor. Even if you only have one tone, you can use it to create an insane amount of tones and hues and lights. You can see just little bits here and there. Just enjoy it. And now the tricky part, I have to make myself stop. Because I want to let this dry and see how it looks when it's dry to see if there's anything else I want to do. Because with watercolor, you always work in layers. I'm cleaning my brush right now, just running it through my water and running it across my paper towel to make sure there's no color left inside my brush. There's quite a bit of water left on this paper, so I can take my now dry watercolor brush and tap it across here to get rid of some of that extra water. But if your brush can't do that, you can also grab any kind of paper towel and just soak up a little bit of that extra water. You don't want a whole ton of water to be just resting on your paper, if possible. There we go. So while that one is drying, let's pop over to the right-hand side and make another one. I'm gonna load up my brush. And I'm gonna gently brush water across here. And as I'm doing that, I actually made a mistake. My mistake is that my water's all the way over here. I loaded my brush and traveled my brush across where this one is. I definitely don't want to do that because I could accidentally drip water onto this paper. So you always want your water to be located in a place where you can move from your water onto your paper without accidentally going across anything. I'm also just quickly coming back over here and cleaning up, excuse me, some of those sharp edges that I was talking about earlier. you want everything to be nice and soft in here. So I'm going to just brush down some water to make things a little bit softer, and then lifting up that water with my paper towel. There we go. So now this one is ready. So I shall load up what is going to be my green and start to tap some of that on. This one I'm going to try to do things a little bit differently, in that I want the majority of the middle of the paper to be left pretty bright. So I'll only apply my tone around the outside. Grab a little bit more color. That way you can see it. Grab a little bit more color. And just start gently tapping some stuff on. Again, there's no real playbook for how this has to specifically look like something. Doesn't have to look exactly like mine. It'd be rather boring if you just made the exact same thing I did. Add your own personal flair to what you're making here. Just enjoy yourself. All right, so that's gonna do it for the first part of this. Now the tricky part is you have to let it dry. You gotta have the patience to just let it dry. Unless you're an impatient person like me, in which case, right off screen, I actually have a hairdryer. So I'm gonna go grab that, dry these off, and then move on to the next layers. Be back in a second. Thank goodness for modern technology. So as you can see, both of my pieces have dried up and they're ready for the next layer of watercolor, because that's the best thing about watercolor is how much you can layer tones on top of each other, providing you've let the paper completely dry in between. You'll know it's completely dry if you can look at it in the light and there's no bright shiny spots reflecting off. Then you know you're good to go. So I'm going to grab my purple and come back here. This time, I'm going to apply another quick layer of water. And just continue to apply another layer of watercolor on top. If I decide, for instance, that that's way too much, then I can always just soak up the extra color. But one thing to remember about watercolor, as you're working, is that it's always going to dry lighter than how it goes on the paper. As you probably saw in that jump cut that I'm going to be putting in later, hopefully I remember to do that, how dark everything was on this paper before I went and hair dried it. This is my favorite part about watercolor, is just how much variety of tone can be added through adding on layers and layers of color. And the thing to remember too is as you add more layers on, you will apply your color in smaller and smaller areas. You don't want to cover the entire paper every single time in the exact same way, in the exact same spots. If you do that, then there's no point in doing layers in the first place. Rather, by applying deeper color in smaller and smaller areas, you will increase the sense of depth and complexity of what you're doing. You're letting the paper do a lot of your work for you. So just remember, let the paper dry completely in between every single layer. And apply your color in smaller and smaller areas every single time. I'm going to repeat this process probably about 3 more times, but I am going to come back after drying this layer to show you how to add another color to both of these, that being blue. So give me just 1 moment, let me dry these up. Alright, these are dried up and ready for their next layer of tone. It's getting nicer and nicer looking every single time. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to grab my blue and apply it to each of these. But I'm not going to use my large brush for this because as I start applying my tone in smaller and smaller areas, I want to use my smaller brushes. So I'm going to use my medium size mop brush. I'm going to load it up in the water. And I'm going to apply, again, a nice quick layer of water across my whole paper. Grab my blue, activate it. Just means putting some water in there. If you have a tube, then you don't really have to worry about this part. Just pour it out of the tube and then start activating it with water. Then I'm going to start applying the blue across the paper. Just let it do its own thing. If you don't like how the color is interacting with certain parts of your piece, you can always just lift it out of there. And in fact, if you tap with your paper towel like I am here, you can see you actually produce some interesting fading effects as well. So I'm just tapping up and down with my paper towel, and it's actually going a long way towards blending out parts of this piece. Such a simple tool can be used for many, many different things. This added color, you can see, is really going to help enhance the feeling of depth and space inside this simple little bookmark shape that we're making here. And again, just remember, if you put something down and you don't like how it's looking, use your paper towel to lift it right out of there and try again. There's nothing wrong with that. And you can even use your paper towel that has color on it already to maybe add some interesting texture effects to your whole piece. Just something to try. It's fun. There's no reason not to just enjoy yourself with this. Because, as I said, there's no specific way that this has to look. You can make it however you want. This is your world. You're going to be the creator of how it looks. Heck, you could even just do this whole thing again, but use different colors than what I'm doing here. I'm simply using blue, purple, and blue and green because they're all on the cool spectrum of colors, so they will always work well together. If you use yellow, orange, or red together, they'll always look good because those are on the warm side of the spectrum. Gonna soften up some of those edges. Again, try to not go over every single thing you did on your previous layers. You don't want to lose what you've already done. You're just trying to enhance what you've already done. So I'm going to call that one good for now. I'm going to pop over to my green. Soften up some of those edges real quick over there. I'm a little bit of a perfectionist when it comes to watercolor. That's just how I am. All right, make myself stop. Gotta learn to make yourself stop. Apply a quick layer of water over this side of the paper. This paper, by the way, is a square piece of paper. I believe it's maybe 8 by 8. Doesn't really matter what size of paper you have. Unless you want to make a super large or a super small bookmark, then you can just cut your watercolor paper accordingly. Just start applying some color. Let it spread out on its own and do its thing. You can see how the paper reacts to different amounts of water on the page too. This tells me I had a lot of water over here, maybe too much, because it spread out too quickly. I'm looking more so for something like here or here, where it slowly and gently spreads out. Just apply it here and there. On this one specifically, once again, I'm trying to leave the inside line here a lot brighter than what's going on outside. If you can see this right here, this is a part of the paper where it's bulging out here and bulging out here, so the water is collecting here in the middle. This is what's called a valley. Unless you want that effect to stay there, which I don't particularly want to in this piece, just soak it up with a paper towel. Paper towel is going to be your very, very best friend, as well as the hairdryer, again, if you're impatient like me. I'm gonna go ahead and take out some of the spots around the outside because I feel like maybe it's just a bit too dark. For me, of course. Alright. So that's gonna do it for this third layer of these watercolor pieces. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go into a bit of a time lapse. I'm gonna do this same thing 2 more times for each side. Again, going darker and darker, fewer and fewer spots. But I'm gonna still cover the paper every single time because I want everything to blend. So you're gonna see a time lapse of the next 2 layers, and then we're gonna do one more thing to this piece over here to finish it off, and one more thing to this piece over here to finish it off. I'm looking forward to it. Hope you are too. Actually, before I do the time lapse, a real quick thing, I just zoomed in on a little corner. The next 2 layers, I'm actually not gonna be coating the entire paper. I want these areas to be very dark, so what I'm instead going to do is I'm just going to grab my color and without wetting the paper, paint it onto a certain spots of the paper. And then quickly dry off my brush and come to the edges of that color and blur them out with a little bit of water. Just like so. And then gently take a paper towel and fade out that edge even more. So I get a nice dark patch of color that I then fade the edges of with normal water and then blur with a paper towel. This has the nice effect of making very, very dark areas without me having to paint over the entire paper again. It lets me control where I want the very dark and vivid areas of my painting to be. Where I want the super dark stuff. Nowhere else. Okay, on to time-lapse. Alright, so the time lapse is over and the actual watercoloring part of this piece is complete. But we're not quite done yet. Oh no, no, no. You see, this is what's called a galaxy technique. It's meant to, again, look like, well, the cosmos, basically, with the swirling tones and colors and whatnot. So, why don't we add some stars to this little galaxy here? Now, you could do this with white watercolor paint, but most of you probably don't have that. So I'm going to show you some alternatives that you can use. The most obvious alternative would be to use a Sakura Jelly Roll white pen. You probably have seen some of these before. They're really popular, they're nice and fun to use, and they can be used to just draw on top of these watercolor pieces to make dots. These work. There's also the Pentel Milky Pop white ink pen. This works well too. My two personal favorites to use is the Uniball Signo white gel pen. White pigment, I should say this isn't gel, this is pigment ink pen. This works wonderfully. And my personal favorite to use is the Presto Jumbo Correction pen by Pentel. This is just a bunch of white corrector fluid that comes out of this little ball here on the tip. Any of these will work just fine. I'm just going to use this one. So what I'm gonna do is I'll zoom in for you. Is I'm gonna come through here, and again, subtlety is the order of the day. You don't want to make things too obvious and like just do too much of any one thing. So I'm just gonna start putting in some dots all throughout here. Some here, some there. Some larger, some smaller. Just to make it start looking like it's a cluster of stars up in the galaxy in the sky. You can do little clusters. You can do big pieces, you can do small pieces. Just enjoy yourself with this part, you know? Alright, so I'm just gonna finish this up real quick. Just do it in certain spots here and there. Just like that. Again, you don't want to do too much. Subtlety is your best friend in this regard. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. So let's come over to the green side and just do a few here too. If you can hear my dog, she's mad because I'm spending too much time down here when I could be up there with her. But that's mainly because she's spoiled due to all the amount of time I've been spending with her thanks to the coronavirus quarantine. She just thinks she's the center of the universe now. I mean, she was before, but that idea has just been reinforced even more now. Alright, so that's going to finish up the majority of what we've got here, but I'm gonna go a little bit more ambitious with the green side here. I want to do one more thing. I'm leaving this part over here alone. I like how that one looks quite a bit, but I want to try something over here. Alright, so I'm down at the bottom of the green side of the paper. I'm going to be using a black Bimoji Kuretake marker for this, but any type of marker, even like a Sharpie, will work just fine for this. But if you can get something with a flexible brush tip, it would help you out. You can even paint on with black paint if you want to. I'm going to just start painting on some black onto the bottom of the page here. Just to get it laid down. And then I'm going to start swiping upwards with my marker. Start to get a feeling of grass in here. There we go. I don't want to cover up too much down here because I like what's going on down here quite a bit. There we go. And now I'm going to try to make a tree. If you want to, you can wait and see what the tree looks like afterwards and then draw it on yours before you color it in. That's totally fine. I'm going to be gutsy. Not necessarily smart, I said gutsy. So while I'm making this tree as well, I'm going to leave space inside the tree that I don't color in. I think doing that effect will make the tree look a lot more visually interesting than if I just made it completely black. It goes up into the various branches, just like that. Swipes outwards and up, just like that. And then I need to start building in the leaves. So for the leaves, I'm just going to make quick little check mark shapes with my marker. Leave certain spots more open than others. I'm just trying to use these swiping style strokes in order to make it so that there's going to be more open space inside this tree. Just a good tip in general for when you're wanting to build out a tree shape is to remind yourself that the leaves of the tree are all individual little shapes inside there. So you don't want all of this to be one completely solid shape. To do that wouldn't look nearly as quote-unquote realistic as coloring it in such a way that everything has a little bit of separation. And there we have it, ladies and gentlemen. There is our 2 watercolor bookmarks. Let me go ahead and get these peeled off. This is the most satisfying part. When you can finally peel off your tape and see just how nice and clean and sharp of an edge you've got there. That's the best part about doing borders all the way around with your tape, is the nice, beautifully solid edge you can create for yourself. Washi tape, again, works the best for this, just because you don't have to worry about your paper getting tore up nearly as much as with masking tape. So I think the only thing left to do for both of these is to give them a signature and then turn this camera around for my final thoughts. So there we are, ladies and gentlemen, a nice simple way to create some really cool, unique works of art that you can either just put up on your wall and display or use them as a bookmark. And so when people see your bookmark, they go, wow, how'd you do that? And you'll say, let me tell you. Have yourselves a good day, ladies and gentlemen. Stay safe.